me to ask you this question. How many have relatives, friends, colleagues, classmates, acquaintances who are named Joseph? And its derivatives, Jose, Joey, who's my husband. How about John, Pedro? How about Mary? A lot of our Filipino friends have a Maria at the beginning of their names, right? Attached to it. So Mary, Maria, yan, madami yan, diba? How about Judas? Even if you have, you're not real. And its derivatives. May cute na derivative yan, diba? Judah or Jude. But did you know that the name Judas was very famous among the Hebrews? It was a constant name that was being used for them. Because Judas is the Greek rendering of the Hebrew name Judah or Yehuda, which is the Hebrew for God be thanked or God be praised. Such a positive name, right? But in spite of it being positive, as far as Judas Iscariot is concerned, the meaning just gives us a shudder. It just gives us that feeling of, wala. Kahit meron kayong kilalang Judas, you're not going to admit it, right? Which just happened a while ago. Because Judas Iscariot is notoriously known for being the one who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Just that mere amount, and he betrayed Jesus Christ. That's why throughout history, Judas Iscariot, and even just the name Judas, is something or someone that creates shudder, fear, or even illicit anger for us. Because he was the one who was instrumental in Jesus being arrested and eventually being crucified. But what are the simple facts about Judas Iscariot? Some quick facts about him. His father's name is Simon. We read that in John. Although there are very few verses that says or mentions Judas, through the verses that were mentioned in the Bible, we will be able to more or less create the story and form the story as to who Judas Iscariot is. So the word Iscariot is not actually his last name. Because during that time, they did not have last names. It was actually a description of where he came from. Because Ish refers to man, Kariot or Karioth is the place where he came from. So Ishkariot is actually meaning he is a man from Karioth. Karioth is a place or a town near the Dead Sea. Nothing spectacular there. But among the disciples, most of them coming from Galilee, Judas Iscariot was different because he came from a different town called Karioth. He was a simple man. No high social status. As with any and most of the disciples of Jesus, I think the only one who would only stand out among them is Matthew. Because being a tax collector, it was expected that he was rich out of the collected taxes from his fellow men. So, but all of them were very simple. Most of them fishermen. And Judas Iscariot, although we did not know what his trade was, we know that he also comes from very humble beginnings. Not from the rich and famous. Nobody that is going to be notable in their town. Okay? But of all the disciples, he was the only one who had an honorable position. He was the only one who had an assignment. And that was that of a treasurer. He was the bagman. He kept the funds which was donated to Jesus every time they'd go around. Because during that time when Jesus would go around, he was not only given goods or drink or food. Aside from being given food and drinks and goods, sometimes Jesus would be handed money for donation. And that was what Judas Iscariot was taking care of. Judas Iscariot was the keeper of the donated money. So that if there are events that they will need to dole out, say giving money to the poor or giving money to some of the widows, they would have a little money stashed away with them. All of these quick facts set aside, there is actually one thing that we remember most about him, right? And that is what we are going to talk about today. Judas Iscariot, the man called the betrayer. In all four canonical Gospels, Judas is mentioned. Mark and Matthew refers to him as the betrayer. Luke calls him the traitor, While John, the Apostle John, calls him all out the devil himself. So these are the labels or the nicknames, if you can put it, of Judas Iscariot in the Bible. That is how he is introduced. So you tell me, why are we talking about such a man? Why are we talking about the betrayer? Why are we talking about the traitor? Is there something good that will come out of that? Is there some lessons that we will be able to draw from it? If there is one overarching theme or message that we will all be able to understand from Judas's life, it is this: that pursuing Christ requires consistent commitment. Pursuing Christ requires consistent commitment. It is something that you do on a constant, regular basis. Once you get a hold or a grip of Jesus, you'd never let go. Even when things are getting difficult, when you tell me, I have so many problems, I have so many things that I cannot do, I'm just so restricted, even come high waters or through drought, through emptiness and fullness, when you get a grip of Christ, you consistently, committedly pursue Him. You faithfully follow once you get a hold and get an understanding of who Jesus is in your life. And this was a very expensive lesson that Judas learned, up to the point that it brought his very own life to be put in, to be sacrificed to be given out, because he did not learn that I have to consistently commit. I have to faithfully follow Jesus. So if you're ready, allow me to bring you to Matthew chapter 10 first. But we will go through Matthew chapter 26, which, if you remember, during 2 weeks ago, when we talked about the Passover, the last Passover meal with Jesus, that is where we're going. Because during that Passover meal, while Jesus and his disciples were having that Passover, there were a lot of behind the scenes and there was a prequel that was happening. So let's see. During Jesus' journey in his ministry, in his public ministry, when he started to go public, the first thing that he did was to call his disciples, and that is the first time where we will read about Judas. So if you remember, when Jesus called his disciples, it was very personal. Only one thing that he said to them when he asked them to follow him, and that was exactly it: "Come, follow me." For the likes of Simon, called Peter, his brother Andrew, James the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, who was also Judas actually, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who was going to betray him. All of them were called by Jesus in a very personal way. All of us have a unique experience as far as Jesus Christ is concerned. When we came to know Jesus, it is very unique. It's different from Brother Peng, it's different from Brother Mark, it's different from Josh, it's different from AJ. We are all uniquely called by Jesus. But every call towards Jesus is something that he does himself in a very personal way. And all of them, all 12, did that. So we will know that Judas Iscariot was also called personally by Jesus himself. Since all of them, when they were called, they were asked to leave their trade behind. The fishermen were said, "Leave your fishing gear and come follow me." When Matthew was called, he was required to leave his tax booth and follow Jesus. We can assume that Judas was called the same way. That Judas gave the same commitment as Peter did, as Matthew did, as John did. They were told to leave everything behind to follow Jesus. And from that time on, aside from the call being very personal, the call was also very specific. They knew what they were supposed to do. And Matthew chapter 10 reads that. It says, He gave them the authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal diseases and sicknesses. Every one of them was a healer. They were called to heal and cast demons. And if you read further down, they were also called to preach. And their preaching message was only one thing. Tell the folks of Israel that the kingdom of God is near. So Judas, as with Peter, James, and John, and Philip, and Thaddeus, they were all given the authority and the ability to heal the sick, to drive out demons, and to speak of the gospel. There was no one that was exempt from the 12. And we cannot question that all of them did it. There was no statement in the scriptures that says that one of them was exempt from doing it and the other one was only doing these things. All of them did the same thing and were called to do that and were given the authority to do that. And Judas witnessed that. He saw it. He was with Jesus all this time. He saw the greatest life that ever lived. He saw compassion in Jesus. He saw the love of Jesus. He saw understanding. He never saw Jesus get angry out of the blue. He did not cut into a fit. He saw the greatest person ever to live for the glory of God. He saw it. With his very own eyes, he witnessed every step, every day that he had spent with Jesus. He also saw the greatest miracles ever performed. He saw the water being changed into wine. He saw the coming of the storm. He saw Peter walk on water. He was one of those who distributed bread. And yet, as they were distributing it, it never got consumed. It never finished. Here's more bread. Here's more bread. 5,000 people in the crowd. 4,000 people in the crowd. He saw that. The greatest miracles ever done. He saw the lame walk. He saw the blind see, the deaf and the mute and the lepers. They were all healed. He had front row seat watching miracles upon miracles upon miracles. And when everybody was saying, wow, you are indeed the Son of God. While everyone was saying, you are God incarnate, Judas was there. And he also heard the best teachings ever to be taught. With Jesus, he heard the Sermon on the Mount. He heard about the story of the lost coin and the lost sheep. And he heard the story of the prodigal son who was accepted by his father once he went back to ask for his forgiveness. Judas served witness to see. Judas served witness to hear. Judas participated in every event that Jesus had. For 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry, he served witness alongside the 11 disciples. And then we question, what happened when he was able to witness the greatest life ever to have been lived? In Matthew chapter 26, we know that Jesus was already having Passover prepared, right? Do you remember that Passover is supposed to be the event that all Jews would really, really celebrate? Because it is the time when they were reminded of what God did to them as the angel of death passed over. Kaya Passover po yung term. When the angel of death passed over every Israelites' home, which had the blood of the lamb painted on the lintel beams or the doorposts of their doors. And because of that, during the last plague that was given to Egypt, which was supposed to kill every firstborn son, whether that is human or animal, but the angel of death would pass over the Israelites' home because God instituted the Passover time. And because of that, they would celebrate it Year in and year out, they would celebrate the Feast of the Unleavened Bread because the bread did not have leaven. So there was no yeast, there was no baking powder. It was flat bread that they were eating. And during that time, if you remember our story 2 weeks ago, Peter and John asked Jesus, "Where do you want us to prepare Passover with you?" But as that was happening, may behind the scene pala. There was another event that was happening in a few scenarios down the road. And this was it. During that very time, the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest Caiaphas. And during that time, they were having a meeting. And that meeting's agenda was, how are we going to arrest and kill Jesus? They were devising a plan. How, when, where? How are they going to arrest Jesus, who was then gaining so much popularity that people were coming following him in droves and in crowds? But one thing that they said is that, let's not do it during the festival. Why? Because during this time, Jerusalem's population would have swelled 5 times. So the population there was, they say, about 2 to 2.5 million. Because they said, if we do it that time, then we might create a riot, which they did not like to happen. So 2 scenes already. The disciples preparing Passover, Caiaphas' palace, having a meeting of the high priests and the elders of how they are going to catch Jesus. There's another scene. In the presence of Jesus, in Bethany, the home of Simon the leper. Not much is said about Simon the leper except this time. So we can just assume that maybe he's one of those who was healed by Jesus. Because he was already going around town healing the sick, especially the lepers, the blind, and the mute, and the deaf. So in this scenario, as they were eating, so Jesus was reclining on the table. There was a woman who came. In the Gospel of John, you will read that it was Mary. The woman came, and to their surprise, what did she do? She poured an expensive perfume onto the feet of Jesus to be able to give him worship. To which the disciples were agag. And they said, "What's happening? Don't do that, don't do that." In the first place, a woman should not be coming close to a man. Much more, go down at his feet, and worship that way. A woman is not supposed to come close to a man and not worship that way. But aside from that, there was one issue that the disciples saw. And what was that? That the very expensive perfume was being poured onto Jesus. The description is, they were indignant about it. That means they were so angry about it. They displayed such displeasure about it. And one person verbalized his displeasure. And who would that be? No, not Peter. Because we know Peter is always diba, up front. This time it was Judas. And what does he say? "Why this waste?" he asks. "This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor." Wow, for once, it seems like Judas has learned something from Jesus, giving and supporting the poor. But when you read the Gospel of John, it is not actually the poor that he was concerned about. When he asked, why wasn't this perfume and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. But John further explains, and he says, he did not say this because he cared about the poor. Judas's heart was now being displayed. The first time we see Judas, he was actually performing and doing what Jesus called him to do. But this time, he was displaying displeasure against Jesus. Why is that? He was not caring for the poor. He did not obey or listen or was agreeing to what Jesus was teaching them. As a matter of fact, it was selfish pleasure that he was after. Because as John says, he was a thief. He was making kupit out of the money bag that was with him. What is kupit for our youth, for our young people? It's like taking a little amount of money. So it's like medyo not as grave as stealing, but it's actually still stealing. Pretty much like when we were young, we would go to our mommy's wallet and like take 25 cents. 25 cents lang naman to buy soft drinks. Yes, mga kapatid, during my time, 25 cents lang ang soft drinks. The 25 cents, di ba, mommy will not notice that I took 25 cents. And that was what Judas was doing. He was taking little amounts of money. What for? It was to use for himself. Sabi siguro ni Judas, poor naman ako ah. Diba? So he can give because it was supposed to be given to the poor or given to the ministry that Jesus was doing. But what was being shown here is that Judas's heart is somewhere else. It's not after what he witnessed. It's not after what he heard. He was already displaying displeasure as far as Jesus was concerned. If you will read through the following verses, it will say that Jesus rebuked them. And Jesus was saying, you will see the poor for a long time, but you will not see me anymore. So let her be. Let her worship the way that she is doing. This woman was showing worship at the best position that she had, giving the best that she had. But the disciples, most especially Judas, was not agreeable to this. Maybe Judas was already seeing, ano ba yan? He was already getting against what Jesus stood for and what Jesus has decided to do. As this was being done, as Judas's mind and heart was already brewing a displeasure against Jesus, this is what he did. He needed to act on that displeasure. So, Judas Iscariot went to the chief priests and asked them, what are you willing to give if I deliver him over to you? Everybody was quiet. I can imagine the chief priests, their mouth being wide open. How can one of Jesus' followers come to us and trade Jesus for money? Maybe Judas would have heard that they were already giving, not ransom, what do you call that? Pot money for anyone who will be able to help them catch Jesus so that he will be arrested and killed. And I am sure Judas would have heard it. Anything for the love of money, Judas was already there. And he was now willing to give Jesus up. And you know how much for? 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver is not an arbitrary number. This is the amount or the cost of buying an ordinary slave. Ordinary. No special skills. Cannot curtsy, does not know how to bow, does not know how to clean, does not know how to cook. Nothing. Entry level, very basic. 30 pieces of silver. Judas has reduced Jesus to that worth. To him, Jesus was but an ordinary slave. To him, Jesus was not worth the most expensive perfume that woman could afford. To him, Jesus was worth only 30 pieces of silver, the same amount I would use to purchase a slave down the road. Jesus was not worth anything as far as Judas was concerned. In spite of the fact that he walked with him, held his hand, went through life with him day in and day out, that did not matter. I want to ask us the same question. What is Jesus worth to you? What is Jesus worth to us? Is he not even worth $2 just to be able to come to the YMCA and fellowship with the believers? Is he worth only $20, $30 of OT pay? Double pay kasi Sister Barry, kasi Sunday. Is he not worth 30 minutes of your time to be able to read the Word and pray and fellowship with him? Is he not worth an extra 15-minute waking up early to be able to come to church on time? Is he not worth just one day a week, to be able to come and serve? and fellowship with the believers. What is Jesus worth to you? And Charles Spurgeon says this, "Yet many have sold Jesus for a less price than Judas received. A smile or a sneer had been sufficient to induce them to betray the Lord." Charles Spurgeon said, sometimes we sell Jesus for less than the amount that Judas have received. What is Jesus worth to us? $10, $20, $30? 15 minutes a day of quiet time. A little extra sleep on a Sunday. And from then on, Judas watched for every opportunity to hand him over. Is this the time? Hey, Jesus is alone. I'm going to call the Pharisees. Okay, you can come. Oh, no. Come back, because Jesus is now with company. Every time there was an opportunity, Judas would be there, scouting, praying, waiting. He was like a lion out to devour his prey, that he was waiting every opportune time to be able to betray Jesus, to be able to do it. Maybe he would text, "Caiaphas, now is the time." And then he would make bawe, No, not now. Every little detail of Jesus' life, now Judas was watching, just so he will be able to turn him over to the chief priests. And when evening came, we are now brought back to the Passover meal. They were all gathered together, and as Jesus was reclining, about to start the meal, and while they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." They say that Judas is actually beside him. "One of you will betray me." Jesus could have outrightly declared that it was Judas. Don't you think he knew? Do you think he knew? He knew. He knew right from the beginning of time. Even in the Psalms of David, he will say that the son of perdition will come. There is someone who will betray the Son of God, incarnate. Jesus knew right from the beginning that it was Judas. But here he did not name him. He did not want to shame him openly. Instead, this was a beginning of Jesus. Jesus' hand being reached out to him. Jesus was giving him an opportunity to be able to repent and take back what he was about to do. He said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." And all of the disciples were saddened. They were all very sad, and they started asking Jesus. All of them, siguro, can you imagine, sabay-sabay sila, "Is it I? Is it I? Lord, is it I?" Alam mo yun, in a classroom, di ba? Surprise graded recitation. And then you don't know, you start shaking. Is it me? Is it me? All of a sudden, your name doesn't get called. And then another one is going to be called. And then it's you, your turn. Then your nerves are never, it's just always on the clincher. And then everybody, all the disciples were asking, "Is it I, Lord? Is it I? Lord, ako ba? Lord, ako ba?" I can imagine Peter. Siguro, Peter was worried and concerned. "Lord, is it I? Is it I?" And Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me." During that time, everybody in the Passover table would dip their food into the bowl. So siguro, can you imagine? I don't know, who was the one dipping his morsel there at that time? Biglang babawiin mo na lang, diba? But during that time, everybody, because what Jesus is showing here is that the person who is going to betray me is someone close to me. He is a dear friend or even family. Because during that time, Passover meal was held among family and friends. In the Hebrew home, once you are welcomed into their house to be able to eat, that means close na kayo. There's a special bond. That's why, di ba, you want to invite people in your home who are close to you. And that's what pretty much happens in our koinonia. You dine together. Once shared with family and friends becomes something very special. And that is what Jesus is saying here. That the one who dipped his bread, that means someone who's close to me, making the betrayal even more painful. Because it's not someone who is not an unknown. It is someone that I know and someone that I know very closely. The one who will betray me is a friend and is a dear, dear friend. And you know what Judas did? And then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, Lord, sure ako, hindi ako yan. And he did not even address him as Lord. The audacity of Judas, because at this time, Judas has already had the deal with the chief priests. He has already received the 30 pieces of silver, and yet he had the audacity, the hypocrisy to look at Jesus straight in the eyes and tell him, Lord, Rabbi, sure ako, hindi ako yan. Sure pa daw siya, di ba? How many of us, when we face Jesus, we think He doesn't know? We confess all our sins. Lord, sorry po, I lied again. Lord, sorry po, nagalit po ako ulit. But the biggest, the gravest sin we try to keep. Why? What for? We think Jesus doesn't know. He knows. You think you can keep anything from God? No, you cannot. But here once more we see the value of Jesus to Judas. When all the disciples were addressing Jesus as their Lord, as their master, they were saying, Lord, is it I? Master, is it me? Surely it is not me, Master. Surely it is not me, Lord. When every disciple was saying, Lord, you master all my life. You rule all of my life. Here, how did Judas address Jesus? As Rabbi, teacher. You are just one of those who teaches us. You just have words of wisdom to give us. But as my Lord, no, you are not. You are reduced to someone like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Homer, Gamaliel even. But to master and to rule my life, to be Lord of my life, you are not. Maybe the miracles that you did was just an illusion. Maybe the miracles that you did was like a sleight of hand. To Him, what is the value of Jesus? Not worthy of the most expensive perfume, worth only as expensive or as cheap as an ordinary slave. And now He is reduced to just a teacher. Rabbi, surely it is not I. And Jesus answered, yes, it is you. Do you think Jesus announced it to everyone? I would suspect it was only a whisper directed to Judas. Because the disciples never suspected him. At the least, siguro ang pinagsuspetsahan nila si Matthew. Kasi nga tax collector siya, di ba? Notorious na siya eh. But to suspect Judas, I don't think they ever suspected him. It was not in Jesus' heart to expose him or to even accost him right there. Because he could have very well said, there's someone who will betray me. Ayan eto katabi ko. Diba, that's how we are. But Jesus wasn't like that. Up to this point, even straight to His face, He was saying, Lord, hindi ako yan. Jesus still had that in His heart. Judas, turn around. I'm giving you one more time. One more chance. One more chance. And that's what Jesus gives us too. Once we let go of His hand, once we try to umalpas out of Jesus' clutches, that's what Jesus does. He calls us time and time again and again through people, through His Word, through the church. Because Jesus wants us back into the fold. But too late for Judas. Because John and Luke says this, then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered him. And then we say, yun naman pala, di naman kasalanan ni Judas. Si Satan naman pala, si devil naman pala, it's all his fault. No, mga kapatid. Because the enemy cannot take hold of anyone who is living and walking in the glory of God. Only reason why Satan was able to get hold of Judas was because he opened the door. He allowed the enemy to come into his life. Why? Because he was taking money, he was stealing money. He was going against, he already sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And Judas never repented and confessed. Because sin that is kept opens the door to Satan's power. Let me say this again. For as long as you are walking in the light of Christ, the enemy cannot hold on to you. So what do we do? The story of Judas shows us that nothing good can come out if you give up on Jesus. Judas was walking with the greatest example of a life lived for God. Judas saw every miracle that was exemplified to show forth faith. Judas heard every lesson that was taught for him to walk in the glory of God. But Judas let go. Because pursuing Christ requires consistent commitment, consistent following, faithful following. Sister Barry, paano yan? I'm not there anymore. I've let go a long time ago. Come back. Once you get a grip of Jesus, hang on. Hold on. No matter how turbulent the seas, no matter how strong the waves, no matter how strong the rain, no matter if the current is something that you cannot fathom, hold on. Because something good comes out when you're hanging on to Jesus. So what do we do? Hold tight. Kapit, mga kapatid, kahit gaano kahirap. No matter how sorrowful and how painful and how sad it is, hang on. Hang on lest you drift away. Hang on for people who may be close to walking away. We read a lot of things, a lot of stories. Pastors' kids, raised in the ministry, have been reared in Sunday school, who have read the word and they say, I'm keeping my options open. There might be something else out there. Some calls it deconstruction, but we call it falling away. And Jude said, be merciful to those who are in doubt. So what do we do? Hang on to Christ and hang on to one another. If there is one whom you see is drifting away, let's not falter. Let's pursue them. Be patient. Call them, kamusta po? Alika, sama ka, kain tayo. Gastusan natin ng konti, $3, $4, $5. Alika, kape tayo. What's happening to you? How are you? Come join me. Come to church Sunday after Sunday, even if it's hard, even if you think you're not getting an answer. Come, call them, hold them. Hold them tight, walk with them. Judas learned a very painful lesson. And that is pursuing Christ requires consistent commitment. It became too late for him. Later on, you will read that the Bible will say he repented. He was sorry for what he did, but he did not fully repent. Why? Because he took his life. If Judas would have waited just a little more to see that Jesus indeed rose up from the dead and was ready to call him back. As with Jesus said during the Passover meal, I will not do this again until you are with me in my Father's kingdom. If you are drifting away, I don't know where you are right now, mga kapatid. If you are drifting away, if you are letting go of your grip of Jesus, if life is starting to be difficult for you, all the more you should hang tight. All the more you should pursue Christ. Because there is nothing that comes out good when you give up on Him. Hang on. Because as Jesus promised, I will be with you to the ends of the earth. I will never leave you nor forsake you. If He has walked with you before, He will walk with you now. Through joys and sorrows, He will walk with us. But what do? Consistent commitment. Faithful following.